Sometimes a single glitch in the plan can lead to the most unexpected and beautiful destinations in life. We follow the accidents, the coincidences, and the fate that brings us all together. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next big twist in the story. I almost lost everything I built over 40 years, and the person who nearly took it from me was sitting across the breakfast table from me every single morning, smiling. I need to tell you what happened, because I still wake up some nights thinking about how close I came to signing my name on that document, how close I came to handing over my home, my savings, and the last thing my wife ever asked me to protect. If it hadn't been for my driver, a quiet man, most people in my family barely noticed I wouldn't be here telling you this story at all. My name is Walter. I'm 68 years old. I spent 4 decades building a property management company in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing glamorous. We managed apartment complexes, handled maintenance contracts, dealt with tenants and inspections, and the kind of slow, unglamorous work that doesn't make anybody famous, but, if you're patient and honest, eventually makes you stable. When my wife, Carol, passed away 3 years ago from a long illness, she held my hand in the hospital and said one thing to me: "Don't let them scatter what we built." I promised her I wouldn't. My son, my daughter-in-law, and I were not close in the way I had always hoped. My son, I'll call him by what he was to me. My son was never cruel, not openly. He was distant in the way some children become when they grow up watching a father work too much. I understood that. I carried guilt about it for years. When his wife came into the picture 7 years ago, I thought she was sharp and capable, which I respected. What I did not understand then was the difference between ambition directed outward and ambition directed at you. After Carol passed, my son and his wife moved closer. They told me they were worried about me being alone. I was grateful. My son would come by on weekends and help with things around the house. His wife would bring food sometimes, ask questions about the business, sit with me at the kitchen table while I went through paperwork. Looking back, I understand now what those visits really were. They were reconnaissance. The company had done well. Not spectacular, but well. The portfolio included 11 properties across 2 counties. The house Carol and I had lived in for 26 years was paid off and sitting in a neighborhood that had appreciated more than I ever expected. My retirement accounts were healthy. When you add it together, it was the kind of number that changes how certain people look at you when they think you're not paying attention. I first noticed something was off about 14 months ago. I began feeling tired in a way that wasn't normal tiredness. Not the kind that comes from a long day or a bad night of sleep. This was a heaviness that sat behind my eyes and slowed my thinking. I missed 2 appointments I had on my calendar. I forgot a phone call with my accountant. I chalked it up to grief, to age, to the general weight of getting older alone. My doctor ran some tests and said everything looked within normal range, so I stopped worrying about it. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that my daughter-in-law had started coming by on mornings I wasn't expecting her. My driver, a man named Raymond, who had worked for me for 11 years, told me afterward that he'd seen her car in the driveway on 3 separate occasions when I had no knowledge she was there. She had a key. I'd given them both keys when Carol died, because I thought that's what family did. Raymond had driven for me since before my wife got sick. He was 61, quiet, punctual, the kind of man who said exactly what needed to be said and nothing more. He knew my schedule better than I did. He knew which clients I trusted and which ones I kept at arm's length. He had watched my wife decline and had driven her to more doctor's appointments than I could count without ever being asked twice. My son and his wife treated him the way some people treat furniture present in the room, acknowledged when necessary, otherwise invisible. They did not understand that invisible people see everything. About 10 months ago, Raymond began noticing that my morning coffee, which I always had before he picked me up, poured from the same machine in the same kitchen, was leaving me unusually foggy on the days my daughter-in-law had dropped something off the evening before. He didn't say anything at first. He watched. He was not the kind of man to make an accusation without being certain, and he told me later that he had asked himself a dozen times whether he was seeing something that wasn't there. He started paying closer attention. He noticed that on the mornings I seemed clearest, sharpest, most like myself, were the mornings nothing had been left at the house the night before. On the mornings after a visit or a delivery, a meal, a bottle of something, a box of fruit, I would be slower, more confused, more agreeable to things I might otherwise have questioned. He still didn't say anything, because he was afraid. Not afraid of being wrong, afraid of what it would mean if he was right. He had no proof. He had no standing. He was my driver, not my family, not my lawyer. He thought about what would happen if he said something and I dismissed it. The way people dismiss things they don't want to believe. He thought he would lose his job, lose the income he relied on, and accomplish nothing. So he kept watching, and he kept quiet, and I kept drinking my morning coffee. And things kept moving slowly in a direction I didn't understand yet. 4 months ago, my son sat me down and told me he wanted to talk about the future of the company. I had been thinking about it too. I was 68. The business wasn't as demanding as it once was, but it still required attention and judgment. I wasn't sure I had the energy for indefinitely. I had no other children. My son had worked in real estate finance for years and understood the industry. The conversation felt natural, even overdue. Over the following weeks, we had several meetings. My son brought his wife. They brought spreadsheets, projections, a plan for how the company could be restructured. It was professional and thorough, and I found myself nodding along more than I was asking questions. I told myself that was wisdom, knowing when to trust the next generation. I didn't recognize it then as something else. They proposed a formal transfer of ownership, not a gift. They were careful to explain a structured transition with my financial security built in. I would retain the right to live in the house. I would receive a monthly payment from the company's revenue. All I needed to do was sign a transfer document and update my estate plan to reflect the new arrangement. They scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, their lawyer, though I didn't focus on that detail the way I should have for a Tuesday morning at their house. They would have everything prepared. I just needed to show up. The Sunday before that Tuesday, Raymond picked me up to take me to lunch with an old colleague. On the drive back, he was quiet for longer than usual. I noticed but didn't say anything. When he pulled into my driveway, he put the car in park but didn't get out to open my door the way he usually did. He sat there for a moment. Then he turned around and looked at me. He said he needed to tell me something, and he needed me to hear it completely before I responded. He said he had been watching something for several months, and he had gone back and forth 100 times about whether to speak. He said he was telling me now because Tuesday was 2 days away, and he had run out of time to keep waiting for certainty he was never going to get. He told me everything. The car in the driveway on mornings I didn't know anyone had been there. The pattern he'd noticed with the coffee and my clarity. The way my daughter-in-law had once lingered in the kitchen for nearly 40 minutes on a day she'd come to drop off a casserole and I was upstairs. He told me he had no proof of anything. He told me he might be completely wrong. He told me he would understand if I was angry with him for saying it. I sat in the back seat of my own car and felt the ground shift. My first instinct was to say he was mistaken. My second instinct was to remember every morning I'd sat at that kitchen table feeling like I was thinking through wet concrete, and the fact that my doctor had found nothing wrong with me, and the slow creep of fog that had followed me around for the better part of a year. My third instinct was to say nothing. I asked Raymond one question. I asked him if he believed what he was telling me. He said yes, without hesitation. He said he would not have spoken if he didn't. I thanked him. I went inside. I didn't sleep that night. I did not call my son. I did not call my daughter-in-law. I called the one person I knew I could trust, absolutely my personal attorney. A woman named Patricia who had handled my business contracts for 15 years and who I had retained separately from any family arrangement, whose number was in my phone under a name nobody would recognize. I called her at 9 o'clock that Sunday night, and I told her what Raymond had told me. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Don't sign anything Tuesday. And don't let them know you're not going to." Patricia contacted a private investigator that same night. She also told me to stop drinking anything prepared in my home until we understood what we were dealing with. She told me to buy my own coffee on the way to the office, to eat at restaurants, to behave completely normally around my son and his wife. She told me that if I was wrong about all of this, we would have wasted some time and some money, and I would have learned nothing except that I had good people around me. She told me that if we were right, the next few days were going to matter enormously. Monday morning, I drove myself to a diner 3 miles from my house, bought a coffee, I watched them pour, and sat there for an hour feeling cleaner in my head than I had in months. I went to the office. I returned my son's call about Tuesday's meeting and told him I was looking forward to it. I sounded like myself, the version of myself they had grown accustomed to. Agreeable, a little slow, easy. Monday evening, my daughter-in-law dropped by. She said she was just checking in, wanted to make sure I was feeling okay before the big day tomorrow. She brought a bottle of orange juice she said was fresh pressed, from a place she knew I liked. She set it on the counter with a smile. I thanked her and told her I was tired and would drink it in the morning. She left. I poured it down the sink the moment her car left the driveway. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully. I drove myself to the meeting. Patricia was already waiting in the parking garage of my son's building. We had agreed she would be close but not visible until the right moment. The investigator she'd hired had spent 24 hours pulling together documentation. I did not yet fully understand, but would shortly. I walked into my son's house at 9:15. His wife met me at the door with that same warm smile. Coffee was already poured and waiting on the kitchen counter, 1 cup, set near my usual seat, prepared the way she knew I took it. I looked at the cup. I looked at her. I smiled and said I'd already had coffee on the drive over and my doctor had told me to cut back. Something moved across her face. Not much. Barely a flicker. But I had been married for 31 years to a woman who taught me how to read the small movements people make when what they expected doesn't happen, and I saw it. We moved into the dining room, where the documents were laid out. The lawyer, a man I'd never met, introduced himself and began walking me through the pages. The language was dense, and my son sat across from me looking patient and almost kind. My daughter-in-law sat to his right. She kept glancing at the untouched coffee in the kitchen. I read the documents slowly, carefully, not the way I'd been reading things for the past several months. I read them the way I used to, the way Carol always said I should out loud in my head, every clause, every condition. And there, buried in the third section of the estate amendment, was the language that transferred not just the company but the house, my house, Carol's house, into a joint trust that listed my son and his wife as co-trustees with authority to liquidate assets upon my incapacitation or death, with a definition of incapacitation so broad it could be applied to a bad morning. I put the pen down. I told them I needed a few more days to review it with my own attorney. My son's voice changed. Not dramatically, he was too careful for that, but there was a tightness in it. He said Patricia had already reviewed a version of it months ago. I told him I wanted her to look at this specific version. My daughter-in-law said something about how we'd come this far and it would be good to just finish it today. I said I was sure one more week wouldn't change anything important, and I stood up. I called Patricia from the parking lot. 40 minutes later, she was on the phone with a forensic accountant who had already flagged 2 suspicious transactions in a secondary business account. My son had set up using the company's name and my signature, a signature. It would later be demonstrated. I had never actually provided. The investigator had also done something else. Working with a contact at the county health department, he had flagged my history of unexplained neurological symptoms and requested a voluntary tox panel through my physician. The results came back within 72 hours. There were trace findings consistent with low-dose sedative compounds that had no business being in my system, not enough to hospitalize. Exactly enough to make an otherwise sharp 68-year-old man seem slower, more confused, more willing to sign things he should have questioned. What followed was not the sharp, clean reckoning of a movie. It was months of lawyers and investigators, and a process that was exhausting and occasionally humiliating because some of it required me to sit across from people and describe the way I had not noticed what was happening to me. The financial fraud case was federal, involving the forged signatures. My daughter-in-law faced separate charges related to the substance findings. My son, in the end, was charged as a co-conspirator. He wept in the courtroom. I don't know what was real in those tears and what wasn't. I'm not sure it matters anymore. They were convicted, both of them. My son received 30 months and is serving it now. His wife received 4 years. The company is intact. The house is still mine. But here's what I want to tell you because I think it's the part that actually matters. When everything was over, when the last hearing was finished and Patricia called to tell me the verdicts, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I thought I would feel relief. I thought I might even feel something like triumph, the satisfaction of justice I'd heard other people describe. Instead, I sat in the same kitchen where I had drunk that coffee every morning for months and felt the particular hollowness that comes from understanding that someone you loved chose something else over you, and chose it deliberately, and chose it more than once. The first person I called was Raymond. I told him what he had done by speaking up that Sunday afternoon in the car. I told him that the single decision to turn around in the driver's seat and say the words he wasn't sure he had the right to say had changed the trajectory of everything. I told him I was changing his employment arrangement, that he would no longer be my driver in the traditional sense, but would instead be a full-time operations manager for the company at a salary that reflected what his loyalty was actually worth. I told him I had set aside a financial gift, separate from his salary, as a single payment that I want you to know was enough to matter. He was quiet on the phone for a long time. He said he had never wanted anything except to do what was right. I told him I knew that, and that it was exactly why he deserved to be rewarded for it. I also did something I hadn't planned when any of this started. I took 6 months to document everything, the pattern of isolation, the financial manipulation. The way the fog had crept in so gradually that I couldn't see it from inside it. And I brought that documentation to a local nonprofit that works with elder financial abuse cases. They had been underfunded for years, working cases with not enough staff and not enough resources. I made a contribution large enough to fund 2 additional case investigators for 3 years. It wasn't charity in the way people sometimes mean that word. It was something more personal than that. It was me putting the experience somewhere it could do something useful. I still live in the house. I still drink my coffee in the morning, though I bought a new machine and I make it myself. Carol's photograph is on the counter next to it. The one from the summer we spent 2 weeks in Colorado, the year after the business finally turned profitable. The one where she's laughing at something I said that I can no longer remember. I talk to her still, the way you do when you've been with someone long enough that they become part of how you think. I was wrong about many things. I was wrong to let busyness substitute for closeness when my son was growing up. I was wrong to assume that proximity meant safety. I was wrong to let fog settle into my mornings without asking harder questions about where it came from. But I was right about Raymond. I was right about Patricia. I was right to stop, finally, and read carefully. This is a true story. It still surprises me, even now. And if you are watching this and you are in a season of life where you are depending on people, please hear me. Pay attention to the quiet ones. Pay attention to the people who have nothing to gain from telling you the truth, except the fact of having told it. That is where loyalty actually lives. I know that now in a way I didn't before, and I am grateful more than I have words for that I found out in time.